What is up, everyone? It's Quinn here, and in today's video, I'm going to be going through a few sell high players after week one. I think early in the season is a great time to buy low on some players, but it's also a good time to sell high. People tend to overreact to one big week. If there's reason to believe these players can't sustain the performance we saw in week one, it could make some sense to move them off your rosters. I've already gone through my waiver wire targets and my buy low players in videos earlier today. If you haven't seen those, you can go check them out. But today we're focusing on players I'm selling high on. If you enjoy, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel. And I want to jump right into the first player here. And this might be a little bit controversial because I know a lot of people really like him. It's going to be Stefan Diggs. And there's no doubt about it. He went out week one, had a big fantasy debut with the Texans, 21.9 PPR points. He was targeted 6 times, caught all 6 of those for 33 yards and 2 touchdowns. Now, admittedly, coming into the season, I was a little bit lower on Stefan Diggs in consensus, and I was a little bit higher on Tank Dell. So coming in, I had them pretty much back-to-back in my rankings. Pretty much every platform, most rankings, Stefan Diggs was going, fairly ahead of Tank Dell in terms of your fantasy football drafts. And even though the production went in favor of Stefan Diggs in week one, I think Tank Dell is actually the better option moving forward. There were concerns heading into the year for Tank Dell because he was only in on 3 wide receiver sets in the preseason. It was Nico Collins, Stefan Diggs, wide receiver 1, wide receiver 2. Tank Dell was the clear number 3. But we actually saw Tank Dell have an 87% route participation in week one. Stefan Diggs ran 1 more route than Tank Dell. Nico Collins actually ran 1 less route than Tank Dell. So these guys' usage was pretty similar. Tank Dell was still a clear wide receiver 3 in terms of total snaps, but when they were actually out there running routes, all 3 of these guys were pretty close together here. I think we all can agree that Nico Collins is the locked-in wide receiver 1. He was a baller last year. He's the one who has the chemistry with CJ Stroud while also being a locked-in top 2 wide receiver. But then when we're looking at the wide receiver 2 here, even though, Tank Dell didn't have the big fantasy day, he didn't get in the end zone twice, he still actually outproduced Stefan Diggs in terms of his yardage. He had 3 receptions for 40 yards. Nothing crazy here, but I'm just trying to get the point across that Stefan Diggs' day was a little bit, inflated because of the 2 touchdowns. In my opinion, the concerning part of Stefan Diggs' role is that he was targeted 6 times for a total of 9 air yards. He was not used down the field at all. He had a 1.5 yard ADOT. You compare that to Nico Collins, who had 124 air yards. Tank Dell had 105 air yards. These are guys who are actually giving you upside on a week-to-week basis. They can make big plays. They're being used down the field. And so if I want to pick a wide receiver in a crowded wide receiver room, I don't really want to rely on the guy who's super volume dependent when there's a ton of mouths to feed. I want the guys that can be big play threats. I don't think Stefan Diggs is any more likely to score touchdowns rest of season than Nico Collins or Tank Dell, assuming their usage is similar. So if I can flip Stefan Diggs for like Tank Dell plus something on top of it, maybe you're giving up Diggs for Dell and then you're getting a positional upgrade somewhere else, maybe like a quarterback upgrade, tight end upgrade, running back upgrade, whatever it may be, I would look at that. I would think about targeting like an underperforming wide receiver, like a Marvin Harrison Jr., or sending Stefan Diggs like plus a piece to like a Jamar Chase team, an Amon-Ra St. Brown team, some of those higher end wide receivers that may be busted. I obviously don't think people are going to panic on like Jamar Chase or Amon-Ra St. Brown, but if you can package Diggs with another solid option, try to bridge that gap to the elite wide receiver tier, that's definitely something I'd be looking to do. I just think people are going to fall in love with the 2 touchdowns. We know Stefan Diggs has been a big name, but based on the usage we saw here in week one, I think Nico Collins is definitely the better option moving forward. And I also think Tank Dell is, if he's pretty much going to match Stefan Diggs in routes. So Diggs is going to be my first sell high option. The next guy who I'd be pretty urgently looking to sell would be Jerome Ford. He actually delivered a pretty solid fantasy day despite a pretty terrible Browns offensive performance. 12 carries for 44 yards. He scored a rushing touchdown, was targeted 7 times, caught 6 of those for 25 receiving yards. So especially in PPR scoring, like a really solid overall day. I do just think a few things are very clear after week one. The first one is that Deshaun Watson looks pretty terrible. I mean, just a few years ago, he was like a locked-in top 5 quarterback in the NFL. I do not know what has happened since then, but he is bottom tier starter, maybe shouldn't even be a starter at this point in the NFL. It seems like his accuracy has cratered. It seems like he has very little interest in actually driving the ball down the field. And even though he's still a little bit mobile, it's like he can avoid sacks. I know the Browns O-line wasn't great, but he can't like avoid the sack and then make a play. It's like he'll avoid the sack and then it'll just turn into another sack or like an incompletion. It just has not been a good look here for Deshaun Watson. I will say, though, I think Watson not really wanting to push the ball down the field, being fine checking down, that did definitely kind of benefit Jerome Ford here with those 7 targets. But I feel like here's the dilemma moving forward. I think there's a real shot that Watson's going to find himself getting benched at some point in the season. If he continues to play the way he did in week 1, I think you look at Jameis Winston and you say, all right, he might make some mistakes, but he's at least going to go out there and sling it. Pretty similar to what we saw with Flacco last year. Like, he put the ball in harm's way, but at least he was giving those weapons an opportunity, and he was putting together some pretty big passing games. And if Jameis ends up taking over, if Watson's out of the picture, those dump-offs are not going to be there for Jerome Ford. And then if Deshaun Watson does stay at quarterback, I just don't think this offense is going to be good enough to support 2 running backs. And that's what they're going to have to do when Nick Chubb comes back. I know Chubb's coming off a very serious injury. I'm not expecting him to be the Nick Chubb of old, but I do think he's done enough with the Browns where he's kind of earned the shot to get the crack to be the running back 1. And even if he's not the same kind of like workhorse we've seen in previous seasons, I have a hard time seeing Jerome Ford taking like 55, 60+% of this backfield. Like, as long as Chubb is active and playing, I think he's probably taken at least half of this backfield, which is obviously not going to be great for Jerome Ford moving forward. So I'd look to pivot from Jerome Ford, get someone who can be a nice option for you season long. That could be a Brian Robinson Jr. It could be a Zach Moss, whose usage looked really encouraging in week 1. Even honestly, someone like Jaylen Warren, who had really bad week 1 usage, could have been due to injury. We know he's a really good player. I just feel like Jerome Ford's fantasy relevant weeks are kind of coming to an end here. I feel like once Nick Chubb is back, it's going to be a gross split. I don't feel like this offense and the quarterback play has proven that this is going to be an offense that can support those 2 running backs. So I'd much rather pivot to a more season-long option, someone who I think will have a role more long-term this season. And if I have to pay up, like give something on top of it to get into that next tier of running back, I would be looking to do so, because I think coming off this game, you can pitch that at the very least, he's going to be a really nice option for the next few weeks. Maybe someone is more optimistic about this Browns offense bouncing back. So I think this is the time to pivot off of him. But if he goes out, struggles in week 2, you're looking at Nick Chubb potentially coming back like off the pup after week 4, then I feel like your window could close pretty quickly. So I would be trying to pivot off of Jerome Ford here. And then my third and final sell high is going to be Tyler Lockett. And I don't think anyone's going to break the bank to get like Tyler Lockett at this stage in his career. But I do feel like he is the perfect throw-in piece to upgrade at pretty much any position. He was really the only Seahawks pass catcher who had a big day, 7 targets, 6 receptions, 77 receiving yards. When I look at Tyler Lockett, I just kind of struggle to see the situation where I'd ever feel super comfortable throwing Tyler Lockett into my lineup. Like, I get it, injuries, bye weeks, you could put him in there, but are you ever going to feel 100% confident with DK Metcalf there, JSN? The passing attack already didn't look great here in week 1. I really don't like rostering those players where it's like they kind of just sit on your bench. You never feel great throwing them in there, but they're kind of just clogging because you feel like they're too good to actually, get rid of. Those are players I like to package in 2-for-1 deals where I can get an upgrade at another position. I think moving forward, Metcalf should be the wide receiver 1, even though he had a bad week 1. JSN was playing top 2 wide receiver snaps in week 1. Now that could be due to the Tyler Lockett injury. Maybe he would have been, in 2 wide receiver sets regardless. But even if it was because of injury, Lockett turns 32, I think this month. Obviously, getting towards the end of his career, if he's already injured heading into the season, I don't think that's a great sign. I would just be throwing him in there. Maybe you can, package your back end running back 1 and Tyler Lockett to break into like that mid-tier RB1 territory. Could do the same thing at the wide receiver position. I would just look for 2-for-1s, especially early on in the season. You have 1 solid game out of him. The waiver wire is probably never going to be better than it is right now, just in terms of like available players with what we saw in week 1. So you can do a 2-for-1 trade, pick up someone decent off of waivers. Could be a young wide receiver, an Adonai Mitchell, a Xavier Legette, a Jalen Polk, someone like that. Or maybe it's a running back, a Tank Bigsby, one of these handcuff options. But I would just be trying to pivot off of him unless you're like ultra desperate at the wide receiver position and you've just got nothing going on. If he's like your wide receiver 5, wide receiver 6, I would be looking to move them. So those are going to be my 3 sell high players. We had Stefan Diggs, Jerome Ford, and Tyler Lockett. Obviously, I'm saying to sell high on these guys. That does not mean you just sell them no matter what. you should be getting a good return. But if someone's willing to overpay because of one big week, I would definitely look to capitalize on that. So that's going to wrap it up for this one. If you enjoyed, hit that like button, subscribe. Thank you all for stopping by, and I will see you in the next one.